Hey guys, this is the evolution discussion. We're going to be covering Charles Lyell and his theory of uniformitarianism today. We got a lot to cover, and it's a lot different than I thought it was going to be. But anyways, we're going to have fun learning science. This is awesome, and again, a lot different than I thought it was going to be. Anyways, we'll get right into it. I love that little intro. Took me a while to make, but it's worth it. It was worth it. All right, before we get into our subject today, Charles Lyell, and his theory of uniformitarianism, we need to go over just a little bit of housekeeping, introduction to the channel type things. So first, I kind of wanted to talk about stream flow. This stream's flow is going to be really a lot different than what a normal stream's flow would be. I have to do, again, as I said, all the introductions, and then I gotta actually go for definitions and introduce my bias in this episode. But under normal circumstances, I'm gonna aim for these streams to be about an hour to an hour and a half. We'll see. I'm not sure I have enough material to get me there, or enough talking skills to get me there, but we're shooting around an hour to an hour and a half. The first 30 minutes of that is going to be introducing the source, which in this case is The Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell, and then the next 15 to 25 minutes is going to be the modern interpretations of that theory, and opposing and opposing and approving viewpoints of that theory. And then the last 30 minutes, I'm going to open it up so that we can discuss about that. But I'll go over the guidelines over discussing, but that's going to be the last 30 minutes of the stream. Usually is going to be devoted to discussing that source. The next thing I wanted to go over is, some of you may have noticed that I'm not really great at responding right away. I am a mechanical engineering student, so I have a lot on my plate. But I wanted to set out a few days that I will set out as response days to you guys. And just so you know those, I was just gonna propose those here. My response days will probably be Wednesday and Friday. So if you don't get a response right away, wait till a Wednesday or a Friday, and I will most likely get back to you, or as soon as I can, I will get to you. Oh yes, and then future streams, I'm hoping to do a stream every bi-weekly or monthly. We'll see how long the turnaround period is for me to get to study the next kind of material for that stream. This took a little bit of studying. The Principles of Geology is a long book, and I could not get to all of it. But the next stream should be on Charles Darwin and his Origin of Species, and focusing on what we lay out here. It'll go into they'll go hand in hand, and you'll see as the series goes on that everything will be kind of building. But those are the next stream ideas, and when that'll likely happen, maybe in the next 2 weeks or in the next month. We'll see. I will announce that on my page. Okay. Channel guidelines. So we just need to go over a few basic housekeeping rules. These are not fun for anybody, but we need to get them out of the way. Swearing. I don't appreciate swearing. There's no reason for it in this channel, so just don't do it. um I won't like ban you or anything for it. Just refrain from swearing. There's no need for it. Um, Combative comments or name calling. Any comment that just serves to insult or name call other people's, especially I've seen this a lot in this kind of discussion on evolution. Most people just prefer to bash other people. Um, don't do that. There's no substantive discussion in that. And if you keep doing that, I'm gonna have to either ban you or delete your comments or something. I will not tolerate insultive, name calling, combative comments that just serve the purpose of being insulting and name calling. Um, Next thing is for discussions. No new material. So when we do the discussion has to focus on what we're actually looking at. So if for this episode, it would be about Charles Lyell, his theory of uniformitarianism, and maybe even the definitions that I lay out today. You can discuss those, but no new material. Don't just go off to somewhere random that we're not ready to go for. It's we don't need anything off topic because it's off topic. Um, And then last one is no trolling or useless questions. Like, I don't need any off the wall, just random questions. I won't pay any attention to them. So if you throw those out in there, and if you're continually throwing them out in there, I might have to ban you or do something about that. But just just don't do that. Like, there's no reason for it. I will dismiss any questions that I see do not follow the guidelines, and I will ban people who are continually breaking these channel guidelines. All right, you got that out of the way. Now we can go on to some easier, lighthearted stuff. Channel clarification. So the goal of this channel is to have substantive discussion over the different scientific material and papers that I'll bring to the table. How we're going to operate is we're looking to explore and learn together, not debate, but in conversation there is a realm of discrepancy. You wouldn't have a conversation if you're not allowed to disagree with somebody. So there is that element to it, but the chief focus of this channel is mainly to explore and learn together. And then whatever disagreements you may have, they can come out in the discussions. It's just that that's not really the focus. Next thing, I do not know everything. A bunch of people want to go online and pretend like, bro, I know absolutely everything. Like, I am infallible in these subject. I know everything about this subject, and you can't even tell me that I don't know anything about the subject. 'Cause I know everything. No, I'm not claiming to know everything about this subject. I know very, very little, actually, and that's why I actually made this channel in the first place, was because I wanted to learn myself what sources and things for evolution are. So I wanted to kind of bring you guys along with me in my journey of learning. So just know I do not know everything. I may say something that's a little stupid. I may say random things that are like, what are you talking about? If I do that, feel free to correct me in the comments. That's fine. Just do that. The next thing is that among this channel, I want you to be able to define and recognize your own bias. So this doesn't mean like I need you to throw your bias out there in the comments or tell everyone what your bias is. I just want you to recognize that you have a bias and this does shape the way you think. Just be able to recognize your own bias. And the last thing is, this seems kind of contradictory, but no questions are off limits as long as they follow the channel guidelines and pertain to the subject at hand. So I won't like make distinctions between, hey, faith questions or scientific questions or anything's off the table. You guys can ask anything, just make sure it follows the channel guidelines. All right, so now we're gonna move into a little bit about my bias and my viewpoints, so you guys can know my bias and how I'm reading these sources. How this is, I try to be as unbiased as I can, but everyone has their own worldview, and that inevitably will shape the way that they read these things. So I just want you guys to know mine. I am a Christian. I believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God and that it should be read literally. The reason I believe this is because of the evidence for Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And the only way to convince me that it's not, that the Bible is not inerrant, would be, as Paul says, to convince me that the death, burial, and most of all, resurrection of Jesus from the dead is not accurate or is not true. I'd love to talk about this, but not in the confines of this channel. So if you have any questions or if you want to like prove me wrong, um, that this channel is not the place for it, I'm going to be putting my email in the description below, so you guys can email me if you have any questions or if you have again proofs and you want to prove me wrong. You can send those there, but not here in this channel. We're gonna focus on evolution and the sources here in this channel. Okay, because of my beliefs in the Bible and that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, I am a creationist. I don't have solid views on the age of the earth. I lean more towards young earth, but I can definitely see the arguments for a biblical old earth. So I don't have very strong views on how old the earth is yet. Those will probably come or disappear. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. We got through the main housekeeping channel intro type things. From here we got to go to the definitions of all of the different like terms we're going to be kind of discussing throughout the channel and especially today. So without further ado, let's go into definitions. These definitions I found through different like sources like Merriam-Webster, Encyclopedia, and I'll put out all of those. I'm going to actually publish like my notes and put that in the description below, so you can kind of see where all these definitions come from. I will say them as I go through them. Like this definition comes from Merriam-Webster. And this is the same with all the quotes that I'm going to use today. I'm going to publish those notes so you can see where all those quotes come from, like the page numbers and everything, just to help you guys out. I will also publish all the different websites I used, so you guys can go see the sources for yourselves if you want to. Please do, actually. Don't take it from me. It's much more helpful for you to go look for yourselves and then understand these things. Okay, definitions. So our first definition is science. And I know much of you are like, why are we defining science? Science is like literally everyone knows what science is. But it's kind of funny because not really many people do. A lot of these definitions, especially for some of the ones that are coming up later, really surprised me. Actually, I did not think that those were the definitions of these things until I went and looked them up. And much of the debate or the controversy actually stems out of these definitions. So it's very crucial that we lay these out now and then kind of go on with our discussion. So, science. This definition comes from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it is the knowledge, or science is the knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through scientific method. And then I have another definition of science. This comes from a geology textbook that I was reading through. This definition comes later on. They refer back to the definition that they made early in the book, but that definition wasn't really clear, so I just quoted this one that comes later on. Anyways, science, you may recall, has no way of verifying whether it has learned the truth. It is a practical undertaking designed to discard ideas that fail, save the ones that don't fail as provisional approximations of the truth, and push ahead. So, from these two definitions, science is basically an approximation of the truth that is found by taking general ideas and testing them through the scientific method. So the next definition we obviously have to go for is, what is the scientific method? The scientific method is a critical, this comes from Encyclopedia Britannica, sorry. The scientific method is critical to the development of scientific theories, which explain empirical, experiential laws in a scientifically rational manner. In a typical application of the scientific method, a researcher develops a hypothesis, tests it through various means, and then modifies the hypothesis on the basis of the outcome of the tests and experiments. The modified hypothesis is then retested, further modified, and tested again until it becomes consistent with observed phenomena and testing outcomes. In this way, hypotheses serve as tools by which scientists gather data. From the data and the many different scientific investigations undertaken to explore hypotheses, scientists are able to develop broad general explanations and scientific theories. So, basically, the scientific method runs in like a three-step matter. You have your hypotheses, then you have your testing, and those are just different observations that you make based on your hypothesis. And then you have your results. And after that, it comes back up to the hypothesis, where you modify your hypothesis and make changes based on what you saw. And then it goes down the line again. So it's like hypothesis, testing, results, modifying hypothesis, testing, results. And it goes up and back down the line. It's kind of this cyclical pattern. When those hypotheses line up with the general tested outcomes and don't need any further modification, they become scientific theories, which are basically broad, as it says, broad general explanations of a certain phenomena. Okay, the next one we're going to go over is the difference between scientific laws and scientific theories. And somehow this got all jumbled up in my notes. Just a second. Okay. This definition comes from a website called Scientific Insights. It's got some really great science definitions, which I was not expecting, but it's pretty good. A scientific law is a descriptive statement about how some aspect of the natural world behaves under stated circumstances. It tells you what happens consistently and predictably, but not why it happens. Drop an apple and it falls toward the earth. The pattern observed billions of times and expressed as that pattern observed billions of times and expressed as a mathematical relationship is a law. So a scientific law is basically like, let's take projectile motion, for example. if you observe, hey, something shot out the barrel of a gun, or something just thrown, follows this parabolic arch every time, and then and you observe that and describe it through like a mathematical equation, which I don't remember the that specific one off the top of my head, but that is the law. Basically, it's the observations, and that is often expressed through a mathematical equation, because most things in the universe can be explained through mathematics. One of the crazy things about our universe is that mathematics applies almost universally. That is a law. Observing and describing what happens is a law. When you go and you try to explain why that happens, it becomes the scientific theory. So, like with the apple, what is that word? With the apple example, the law is the scientific law for gravity is the idea that everything accelerates downward at 9.8 meters per second squared, right? We observe that time after time after time again. We can see that everything that is placed in the air accelerates downward at the same speed. If we then explain that, like, oh, all of these things must be operated on by some force, and we're going to call that force gravity, then you go into the realm of scientific theories. The observation that it falls, and that mathematical equation that the gravitational constant is 9.8 meters per second squared, is the law. The idea that there is a force called gravity is the theory. I'm going to read, this definition has a little bit more, and I'll read that. A law does not outrank a theory, and a theory does not graduate into a law once enough evidence supports it. They do fundamentally different jobs. A law describes what happens, a theory explains why it happens. So, yeah, that is definitely a mistake I see a lot, is people will say, hey, there's this scientific theory, but, if that scientific theory just was supported more, it would turn into this scientific law. No, scientific laws and theories are completely different. And that's why there's a theory of gravity, and there's also the law of the gravitational constant. So that's the difference. Law is describing what happens, theory is describing why it happens. Okay, next is there's actually two different types of science. I don't know if you know this, but there's actually two different types of science, and they are inductive and deductive science. And what is really interesting about science is that science is almost exactly the same as reasoning. In like, I mean, you guys might not think that's crazy, because yeah, science is obviously logical and reasonable. But what I mean by that is you can take reasoning, like terms for reasoning, and apply them to science. So inductive and deductive actually comes from reasoning and logic. Inductive reasoning is, we'll start with deductive. Deductive reasoning is reasoning that starts with like a general rule and then arrives at specific conclusions. And inductive reasoning is the opposite. It starts at observations and then makes a general conclusion. So, for example, if we had the general rule that, say, all swans are white, if I were to go and say, like, hey, I'm going to go look at a swan, that swan must be white. That is a deductive reasoning. You're starting with this general rule and then deducing, if I see a swan, it has to be white because I know that all swans are white. So it must be white. That's deductive reasoning. If you were to say, hey, I observe and I've seen several hundred swans, and every one of them has been white. Therefore, all swans are probably white. That is inductive reasoning. The difference between the two is that in deductive reasoning, you can come to very specific and true conclusions simply because you know all swans are white. I just know this. So if I see a swan, it has to be white. And that's a very specific, and that is has to be true. In inductive reasoning, you're saying, hey, I've seen all these swans. They have to be white. So I'm going to come to this general conclusion that if I see any other swan, they all have to be white. All swans are white. That's a general conclusion. This is not necessarily true because you haven't seen all the swans on the earth. So you have no idea if there might be one black swan out of all of the swans, or one rainbow colored swan. You don't know. There could be this cosmic colored swan that has just like, it's iridescent and it has stars in it or something, and you have no idea if that's true or not. That's inductive. Inductive comes to general approximations and conclusions. It can't it can't ever be completely true. It's always probabilistic, and that, like, you think that all these things are, that this thing is true, but you have no way of telling because you can't fully observe all of them. If you were able to fully observe them, like say we went around the world and we saw every single swan, we know for a fact they are all white, then that becomes deductive reasoning. You've just formed a deductive reasoning rule, basically. So in science, deductive reasoning is the type of science that follows the scientific method. You come from your hypothesis. You say, hey, I think this. You test your hypothesis, you come to your results, you modify your hypothesis. That's deductive science. In inductive science, you start at your observations testing spot. So you go, I've seen this. I'm going to say, like, I've seen the results. I think the results happened because of this. That's your hypothesis. Yeah, so you go to, I think the results happened because of this. So you form your hypothesis theory. This can then be used to make predictions or be tested out again and modified so that it kind of turns into into deductive reasoning. It's just that inductive and deductive start at different steps. They go in the circle of modifying each other and then eventually turn into scientific theories. But there's obviously a difference in where they start. I have another definition of deductive and inductive reasoning that I'm going to read for you guys. It's from Scientific Insights. Again, so here it is. Deductive reasoning starts with a general rule and arrives at a specific conclusion. Inductive reasoning works in the opposite direction. It starts with specific observations and builds towards a general conclusion. Inductive conclusions are always probabilistic. They can be strong, well supported, and extremely useful, but they can never be guaranteed the way a valid deductive conclusion can. This is why inductive reasoning forms the basis of hypotheses rather than proofs. So notice that last line. This is why inductive reasoning forms the basis of hypotheses rather than proofs. There is a element of inductive reasoning to all of science, as we saw. The only type of science that doesn't have inductive principles in it is when you have a scientific law and you're just saying, hey, this happens, so I'm going to just describe how that happens and make that mathematical principle. That is the only type of science that is deductive only. You have this element of inductive reasoning in all of science, simply because, as we saw from our definition, there are certain, like, you cannot see all the observations, right? We haven't observed everything in the universe. So if I make a hypothesis in a deductive science way, and I try to, modify that hypothesis and it becomes a theory, I can never say for 100% certainty that that theory is true. Sorry, I got distracted by a comment. I can never say for 100% fact that these are true, right? Because there might come an observation one day that contradicts what my theory says, and then I have to go back up and look through and remake those observations, that evaluate that hypothesis. So there's a little bit of inductive reasoning in all of science, but deductive science and inductive science are generally different, just because of the way the part they start in the scientific method. So I think we've labored the point well enough. Actually, no. Let me show you an example, because I wanted to actually show you guys an example before I just moved on from this. An example of inductive science is the idea of the atom, right? We were not able to observe the atom. We just came to the conclusion that there's probably a fundamental particle that forms everything, just based on observations. Then that hypothesis was changed repeatedly, as you can go back and see. You can go back and see, like, the atom was originally theorized to be this weird ball that had electrons, protons, and neutrons just floating around in it. Now it's this nucleus that has protons and neutrons and has electrons orbiting it. And that was an example of inductive reasoning. I'm pretty sure now we have been able to observe atoms with our, like, electron microscopes. So that's an example of inductive scientific theory turning to a deductive scientific theory, where now we're able to actually see it. So we know it exists. And that's now a deductive science. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out to you, because it shows. Just drop something. It shows all the different stages that I just described. Okay, so we can go on to Charles Lyell. So first, I wanted to give a little bit of background to who Charles Lyell is. Charles Lyell was a law student. This comes from Encyclopedia Britannica, by the way. Charles Lyell was a law student who graduated from Oxford. Oh my gosh. I was practicing this earlier today, and I said that same thing. For some reason, I keep stuttering on studied, and I say stutter. I don't know. My stutter is just making me say stutter. This is crazy. He studied under both naturalists and creationists, which was really interesting. His approach to the scientific method and to making different observations was really novel for his time. Like, many people did not have that approach, and his approach is kind of novel today too, although it's not said to. I'll show you that later. His approach and findings had great influence on Charles Darwin later on. Not only his findings, which we know, the theory of uniformitarianism provided the geological timescale for evolution to even occur, but his approach, the approach that I was describing that's so novel for his time, really greatly influenced Charles Darwin. All right. So we'll move on to the principles of geology. I'm going to walk through the main themes of chapters 1 through 3. These are not what I expected the themes of chapters 1 through 3 to be, but his theory of uniformitarianism is presented through chapters 1 through 3, and the like he makes all his strong cases for it later, but this is where he really lays out what the theory of uniformitarianism is. He does this in a really interesting way, but I'll show you. So we'll start in chapter 1 because there's really no other place to start. What he starts out with in chapter 1, he starts out with describing Egyptian mythology. Yeah, I know. I would not have guessed that in a million years, but he starts out by describing this Egyptian mythology and this principle in it that the earth, basically in their religion, they had this, they theorized that the earth was like, it would go through these 100,000 years cycles where it would be stagnant, and then all of a sudden the gods would wipe it clean and start over. They would completely redo the geology, the scenery, everything, and create new people, new animals, put them back on the earth, and it would go through another 100,000 year cycle and then completely be wiped again. This Charles Lyell actually really liked this theory, not because that it was necessarily all that factual, but it did have this idea that the earth was not stagnant, that it would move around, that geological thing, like the mountains would be like diminished and moved to different places, and that the oceans were all like, the ocean was over here and then it got moved over here. There's this morphology that happens to the earth. It's not just this stagnant thing that many people had believed that it was forever, that it was just this, it never changed, it just was always the same. This idea was then picked up by the Greeks, and I'm pretty sure it was the Egyptians. The Greeks learned from the Egyptians, and they progressed this idea even further, where they theorized different things that would happen under these remakes. They didn't quite call them they didn't quite use the idea that everything was wiped clean, but that things were moved, and that that there was still a supernatural influence on it, but that things kind of like moved all over the place, and they would continually move. And that was another thing that Lyle kind of attached to, was he was like, yes, we're getting closer to what we're seeing today. The observations that Lyle was really focused on throughout most of these chapters was they had found fossilized shells and fossilized bones of sea creatures way out in like these deserts and on the land and buried deep into mountains. And they're like, how could this have happened? If the earth is stagnant, how could this have happened? And creationists, the creationists of his day, were proposing that it was the Noachian flood, that Noah's flood brought all these shells and sea creatures and things on the land. But Lyell didn't like that idea because they were buried very, very deep into these mountains. And he's like, I just don't see how a flood could take these shells and bury them into mountains, or that a mountain could form after such a flood. Like, the time scale that was provided after the flood was like 4,000 years. So or something like that. There was simply not enough time to form a mountain with these fossils in it. So there has to be something going on, and obviously the geological things are moving around. There's not enough time to form these mountains after the flood. So there has to be something that got these shells here and got these fossilized bones here. what he really railed against was the idea that the Earth was very, very young. He just simply he said there was not enough time for all these things to happen in a in like a 6,000 year time span. There had to have been, like the Egyptians, like the Greeks were saying, a really, really long period of time where things were moving and like slowly building up and slowly going away, where all these fossils could get to the places that they are. This idea then translated to the idea of uniformitarianism, which the definition of uniformitarianism I again got from Britannica, and I'll just read that now. Uniformitarianism is in geology the doctrine suggesting that Earth's geological processes acted in the same manner and with essentially the same intensity in the past as they do in the present, and that such uniformity is sufficient to account for all geological change. Lyell, yeah, for all geological change. Lyell took this, took the observations that he was seeing with all the different things that he could see actually moving. He could see that the mountain was gaining about like 2 millimeters a year or something like that. And he then proposed that this is what had happened, that this is how these fossilized shells had gotten there. By the way, there is not a lot of dissenting views that really made much sense. To Lyell's, many of the Christian views, because they thought that the idea of uniformitarianism would destroy Christianity's time scale and would cause very, very stark resistance to Christianity, they had proposed that these fossils were not actually fossils at all, but instead were, I don't even know, rocks that had been formed to look like fossils. So, this idea of uniformitarianism looks very, very strong, very, very interesting. It then, uh, as he publishes his first principles of geology, this is actually the first one. He goes on to reform this like 12 times, but he publishes this one, and most people look at it and we're like, okay, this makes sense. The things that happen right now, we can observe those and we can say, hey, they must have happened in the past to form these different landmarks and all that we see today. Here's another quote from Lyell that shows what he proposed as uniformitarianism. As the present condition of nations is the result of many antecedent changes, some extremely remote and others recent, some gradual, others sudden and violent, so that the state of the natural world is the result of a long succession of events, and if we would enlarge our experience of the present economy of nature, we must investigate the effects of her operations in former epochs. So, uniformitarianism, as Lyell proposed it, was this idea that we can take all that we see today and extrapolate it back through time. He was not really opposed to the idea of catastrophism, that things can happen suddenly and violently, but he just didn't see that there was much evidence for that in the different things that he had observed. Today, it's a little bit different. There are many observations, and I'll get to that as we review it, in like what people think, what the scientists study nowadays, what scientists think nowadays. That there is some level of catastrophism, that there are examples of great geological change really fast. But from Lyell's perspective, there really wasn't that much that showed this. He instead, coming from what he saw, he said that there must have been just this very, 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 very slow formation of all these different things. The main thing that Lyell's did differently here from his counterparts, which all, um, whether naturalist or creationist, kind of had this idea of it must be only like 4,000 years, and there can't be these epochs of like deep time that Lyell's really first brought. His sorry deep time that his that they had started at this idea, this conclusion that there must be only 4,000 years, and then had tried to interpret all the different facts through that. What Lyell did that was differently from them was he took the observations and in a true inductive manner, he just looked at the observations and made a conclusion. What he criticized and what was so novel of his time was the idea that you just start from the observations. You don't have like many people had a conclusion that they were trying to prove that this an inductive science that starts from observations and then goes to conclusions was kind of first started with Lyell. He was the first one in this, especially in this field, to propose that all we need to look at is the observations. Not that people weren't looking at the observations, but they were running off a more deductive method where they had their hypothesis, looked at the observations, and then tried to interpret it through that, but they were missing much of what was being seen. Later on, he goes on to defend his ideas of uniformity, and like he actually goes on and kind of disproves evolution. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Maybe in our discussion we can talk about that. I'm going to move on to the modern view of uniformitarianism that we have today. For this, I went into an article that's reviewing the term uniformitarianism in modern earth sciences. That's the title of it. It is written by Marco Romano, and I pulled this quote from it. For example, the study of the present in modern earth sciences, analysis of current processes and associated inferences with respect to the fossil record provides substantial evidence that a steady state interpretation is inapplicable to Earth history, that catastrophic events in the past have played important roles in the history of the planet and of organic life, that rates of various geological processes vary widely, and that some processes which are currently operating cannot be extended to the geological past and vice versa. So most scientists nowadays run off this, they run open-handedly with both. They have uniformitarianism for for different geological processes that that must have happened slow, and they have catastrophism for observations that they see, hey, this had to have happened very, very quickly. There's certain things about this, like there's certain trees that were like buried or something like that. There's just, this cannot have happened slow. But there's also, the uniformitarianism aspect where, yeah, there can be this, these observations that we see today can be extrapolated back, and that we see, hey, this could have happened very, very slowly. So the idea that Lyell first presented isn't really not used today, but it is used in conjunction with catastrophism. And the idea that we can extrapolate the current movement of things back is still in use today. And that's basically all of the review of modern. There's not really a controversy over whether catastrophism should be allowed, or like whether catastrophism should be used or not. And there's not really a controversy over whether uniformitarianism can be true or not. Both of them are used to describe different phenomenon in geological and geology. So from here, I kind of wanted to go over something that caught my eye when I was reading the geological textbook that I referenced earlier. And this is something that I've seen used a lot, but I just didn't know, it's something that kind of catches me off guard. I just wanted to show you guys it. So that Navigating the Geology of National Parks book that I've referenced earlier puts this in chapter 10. But recognize that scientific evidence for an old Earth and later for evolution is about as clear as science gets, and that the level of scientific disagreement on these issues is about as low as disagreement ever gets in science. Within the scientific community, the argument about whether the Earth really is older than historical records is akin to the scientific argument about whether the Earth is roughly spherical. Lively discussions clearly continue in the blogosphere and in many non-scientific circles, but those discussions are at best rather weakly linked to the science. I don't know why they put the word "the" in there, but the question I have about this is, why are we saying this in the first place? This is not said about like the theory of gravity or even other inductive sciences like the theory of atoms, or even often against the idea that the Earth is flat. Like, people don't usually say this, but for some reason we're saying it here. And it's not like what the truth value of it. Like, yeah, amongst most scientific communities, the disagreement is very, very low. That evolution and old Earth are true. But why do we need to say this? We could just show, hey, these are all the facts for evolution. These are all the facts for a old Earth. But this also needs to be added. I don't know why. And some of you might say that it's because there is this lively discussion and disagreement in these non-scientific circles and blogosphere. But it's like, if there's a disagreement, the purpose of science is to feed off disagreement. Honestly, the purpose of science is to look at all the different observations and come to a conclusion. Why are we saying this and demoting disagreement? It doesn't make any sense. To me, this says that this is true and that you should not disagree with this. But as we saw with what Charles Lyell was saying, if you start at a conclusion, you're never gonna get to the place you want to get to. Inductive reasoning has to start at the observations. And it's just so interesting to me that we would want to say this, which is really kind of not scientific in a way, because it's proposing that we don't go and look at things for ourselves, that we just take this at face value, that it's true, and that we don't disagree with it ever, and saying, hey, you can't disagree with this, it's just fact. But that's not what science says. It says, hey, if you can go find an observation that disproves this, then we're going to change our viewpoint. We're going to change the science. So I just wanted to point this out. I've got this argument like multiple times, or it's not even an argument, it's just like this statement. And I just wanted to like show you this is not really scientific. If we go and actually do the inductive science, we can't have this conclusion that, hey, evolution and old Earth must be true. We have to look at the observations and interpret them where they lead us. This was the same thing that caught the creationists off guard and the naturalists off guard in Lyell's era. So it should not catch us off guard here. Okay. That is all I have. We can go on to our prepared. I have prepared questions. If any of you guys have questions, we can go on to those. I'll leave a little bit time. I know there's only like 5 people here. If you guys have any questions, we can go look at those. But I've got a few if we don't. So I'll just kind of leave that open. Oh, wait. One of the prepared questions that I had, which was something very, very interesting that was proposed by both naturalists and creationists during Lyell's era was the idea of a universal ocean. So this idea was that there was before people lived on the earth, there was this universal ocean. The whole world was covered in water. And then out of that, the land began to rise out of the water by different methods. Some proposed that it was concurrent volcanic eruptions that would form these islands. And eventually we get to what we see today. This was really interesting to me just because of the statement of the universal ocean is also said in Genesis, and everyone's going to think I'm going towards the Noachian flood. No, I'm talking about the first sentences in the Bible where it says, in the beginning, there was nothing, and God's Spirit hovered over the face of the waters. So that was a really interesting thing that I was like, hey, there was probably this universal ocean, and that's why all these animals got here. Obviously, it wouldn't fit well into the Genesis account because there's no animals in those waters that it was describing. But it was very interesting to me that it was like, hey, in Genesis, it says the same thing. You guys got any questions? Otherwise, I can go on to my other prepared question about evolution, and we can get out of here. Okay, so I teased this idea that Lyell kind of disproved evolution earlier on in my my spiel. We can go back and kind of look at that. So, in chapter 9 of the Principles of Geology, this is the first edition. again, I read the one that was actually published in 1830, and um not his later renditions, and he did like 12 renditions. Like he redid this thing 12 times. I don't know if I'd have the patience for that, but he just wanted to do that. So in his first edition of the Principles of Geology, chapter 9, he answers this argument that someone would make against uniformity in nature. And the argument goes like this. Here, I'll read a little bit of it. It is impossible, he affirms, to defend the proposition that the present order of things is the ancient and constant order of nature, only modified by existing laws. In those strata which are deepest, and which must consequently be supposed to be the earliest deposited forms, even of vegetable life are rare. Even vegetable life are rare. Shells and vegetable remains are found in the next order. The bones of fishes and oviparous reptiles exist in the following class. The remaining birds, with those of the same genera mentioned before. In the next order, those of quadrupeds of extinct species in a still more recent class, and it is only in the loose and slightly consolidated strata of gravel and sand, which are usually called diluvian forms, that the remains of animals such as now, and people in the globe are found. The others belonging to extinct species, but in none of these formations, which are called secondary, tertiary, and or diluvian, have the remains of man or any of his works been discovered. So basically, this argument is that these it could not be constant because we see that there's different evolutions or different arisings of different types of animals. There's the vegetable life with the shells, and then there's the fish, and the reptiles, and then there's the birds, and then there's the quadrupeds, and then there's the mammals, and then there's man. Like we see in evolution, the evolution progression. But what he says is that this cannot be there cannot be uniformitarianism cannot work based on the fact that this happens just because there's more animals, there's more different things that would cause uh these whatever these like different forms of dilution and carving away at the rocks. It would cause those to go faster or slower based on the amount of mammals and species and plants and things present. So there cannot be uniformity because there would be different times at which this would be faster and slower. But Lyell refutes this, and he points out that all right, here, I'll just read it. In the above passages, the author deduces two important conclusions from geological data. First, that in the successive groups of strata, from the oldest to the most recent, there is a progressive development of organic life from simplest to most complicated forms. Secondly, that man is of comparatively recent origin. It will be easy to show the first of these propositions, though very generally received, has no foundation in fact. From his different observations that he makes, he says that there is no development of organic life, that actually these different things show up all together. It's just man that kind of doesn't fit the picture. He just kind of comes out of nowhere. But all of these different types of animals actually live together. And in so doing, he inadvertently, because the theory of evolution isn't even around yet, but he inadvertently disproves evolution just because he says, hey, there's no hierarchy, there's no development. obviously this is not like I'm not trying to make a strong argument against evolution or anything. I just think it's funny that he kind of disproves it before it even begins. And um obviously there can be different observations that prove Lyell wrong, but it is funny that he makes an argument against evolution before it even exists. Eh, and then is one of the main influences on why evolution exists, and he can be both in the main in the same at the same time. One of you asked, "What are your future discussion topics you are thinking of talking on?" So, as I said, we're going to be going into uh, the actual theory of evolution, where the next episode is going to be on Charles Darwin and his Origin of Species. That's a very next episode. So we're gonna get into evolution, but I am basically gonna go down the line of the development of evolution. So after the Origin of Species, we'll probably go into one of the next like I don't know how to say that. The next most recent, but like recent to Darwin discovery, if you know what I mean. Like after Darwin, there was another discovery of that proved evolution, and we'll go into that one. And then we'll just keep going down the line until we get to the modern day. If you guys have any topics that you want to look at, then we can go there. This is just kind of a general um, structure for the series. I'm not like fully 100% set on we have to go down the line one by one or I'm going to lose my mind. No, we can go to different things at different times. It's just going to generally follow that structure. With that, I don't have any more questions. So if you guys don't have anything else, I think that's going to be the end of this stream, and I'll catch you in the next stream, which, as I said, I will send out in my channel when that's going to be, either 2 weeks from now or within a month from now, hopefully. But I do have to get through the book Origin of Species, and that is a big book. So pray for me. Okay, I'm gonna send you guys out with my favorite outro that I made myself. So here you guys go. I'll see you later.